On every living organism, there is the imprint of the higher dimensional force which made it. Whatever it is that made blind matter into whales, squirrels, and human beings, it left its calling card inside each.
What if reality is far stranger than we've been taught? Terrence McKenna believed that hidden dimensions are not fantasy, but real landscapes of mind and spirit that anyone can access. Across history, mystics, shamans, and visionaries have spoken of gateways that lead beyond the veil of ordinary life. McKenna's explorations pulled back that veil, revealing methods that blend ancient wisdom with daring experiments in consciousness. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's a living invitation to step into realms where time bends, beings appear, and the mind becomes a vessel for something greater. Together, we'll uncover how his path connects with forgotten traditions, psychological insights, and the collective future of humanity itself. The whisper beyond the veil. There is a feeling many people carry, a sense that the world before us is only a surface, and that just beyond it lies another order of reality. This whisper has haunted human beings for as long as stories have been told. Terrence McKenna, with his fearless journeys into altered states of consciousness, took this feeling seriously and treated it as a map. He believed that hidden dimensions were not metaphors, but living landscapes waiting to be entered, and he spent his life pointing to doors most of us have been taught to ignore. To understand what McKenna was reaching for, it helps to notice how often this same yearning has surfaced in human history. In every culture, there are myths of a veil, a thin line that separates ordinary perception from a deeper truth. The philosopher Plato imagined a cave where people watched shadows cast on a wall, believing them to be reality itself. Only the one who broke free and walked into the light of the outside world could see what was truly there. McKenna often echoed this thought, suggesting that our everyday consciousness is much like those shadows, convincing, familiar, but incomplete. Yet humans did not only speak of this separation in philosophy, they created ways of touching it directly. Across the steppes and forests, shamans carried drums whose steady beat was said to open paths into other realms. The sound was not only music, but a bridge, a rhythm that could shift awareness until another layer of reality emerged. The drum became a vessel that allowed the traveller to cross thresholds, just as surely as Plato's prisoner stepped beyond the cave. What Plato described in words, shamans enacted through sound and movement. Both were attempts to pierce the ordinary and glimpse the hidden. McKenna placed himself within this same stream of seekers. He was not inventing the desire to go beyond, but reviving it in a modern context. While others might see altered states as mere illusions or chemical tricks, he insisted they were doorways, as real and profound as any ancient ritual. He often pointed out that cultures untouched by Western rationalism never doubted the existence of other worlds. For them, the invisible was woven into daily life, and the tools to access it, songs, plants or drums, were treated as sacred technologies. What makes this pursuit compelling is not only the promise of wonder, but also the risk. To look beyond the veil is to step into the unknown. Plato's freed prisoner did not return with ease. He stumbled in the bright light, blinded by what he had never seen before. The shaman's journey too demanded courage, for the spirits encountered were not always gentle. McKenna knew this shadow as well. He warned that higher dimensions could astonish, but they could also dismantle the comfort of what we think we know. To him, this was not a danger to avoid, but a necessary challenge, a test of whether we truly wish to see. The question then arises, why do humans keep seeking these gateways if they bring both light and disorientation? Perhaps because the whisper does not fade. Even when suppressed, it resurfaces in dreams, in art, in moments when time feels suspended. The sense that something vast lies just beyond ordinary perception seems to press on the human imagination, asking to be acknowledged. McKenna believed ignoring it led to a kind of spiritual starvation, while following it could reveal dimensions of mind and cosmos that were otherwise unreachable. In the modern world, the whisper is often dismissed as fantasy, yet it remains persistent. It can be felt when silence falls and the world seems charged with presence, or when music carries us somewhere words cannot describe. For McKenna, these glimpses were not accidents but invitations. He saw in them the same call that had guided Plato's reflections and the drumbeats of ancient shamans. Each was a reminder that reality is not fixed but layered, and that we have within us the ability to step across its thresholds. This opening chapter is only the beginning of that story. The path McKenna followed leads deeper into the traditions of those who came before him, cultures that built entire practices around reaching beyond the veil. To trace his method is to see how old these longings are, and how they continue to shape the human search for hidden dimensions. The next step is to walk into those ancient doorways, where rituals, symbols, and myths point the way toward realms that stretch far beyond the familiar. Ancient keys and forgotten doors. The sense of hidden dimensions has never been limited to philosophers or mystics. Across the ages, entire civilizations built their rituals and beliefs around the idea that the visible world was only one layer of existence. When Terrence McKenna spoke of unseen realms, he was echoing a current that had flowed long before his time. What he discovered through plants and vision was not new, but a continuation of a lineage stretching back thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, this conviction took the form of elaborate funerary texts that guided souls after death. The Book of the Dead was not a single book, but a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions meant to help the departed cross into the afterlife. The Egyptians did not see death as an end, but as a passage into another dimension, one that required careful preparation. The words themselves were keys, designed to unlock gates and protect the soul from confusion as it travelled. Reading these texts today, one can sense the same urgency McKenna described, the certainty that unseen realms are as real as our own, and that without guidance, they can overwhelm the traveller. Centuries later, in the high mountains of Tibet, another practice emerged that sought entry into hidden dimensions without waiting for death. Dream yoga trains practitioners to remain aware within dreams, to navigate the dream state as consciously as waking life. Within this practice, dreams were not private illusions, but gateways into subtler levels of reality. A disciplined dreamer could use the night hours to explore, to learn, and even to awaken spiritually. McKenna often admired such traditions because they proved that human beings could cultivate techniques of dimensional travel without needing substances. To him, it confirmed that consciousness itself, when trained, could cross thresholds. Far from Egypt or Tibet, the Yoruba people of West Africa carried their own vision of layered reality. They spoke of Orun, the spirit realm existing alongside the visible world of Aye. Orun was not distant or abstract. It was immediate, a dimension where ancestors and deities lived, influencing daily life. Rituals, offerings, and divination were ways of keeping communication between Orun and Aye alive. For the Yoruba, to ignore Orun was to cut oneself off from half of reality. McKenna would have recognized in this belief the same intuition he found in his own journeys, that the cosmos is not singular but multidimensional, and that humans are meant to be in dialogue with those unseen layers. When these traditions are placed side by side, a pattern emerges. Whether through sacred texts, disciplined dreaming, or ritual connection with spirits, cultures have always created methods of orientation for travelers between worlds. None of them treated the unseen as a random hallucination. They developed maps, languages, and practices to help people cross with safety and purpose. McKenna's fascination with plant teachers fits into this same pattern. His methods may have been controversial in modern science, but they echoed the same timeless attempt to make sense of journeys beyond the veil. It is striking that these practices all involve preparation. The Egyptian texts were memorized and recited carefully, the Tibetan monks trained for years in meditation, and the Yoruba rituals were led by elders who carried deep knowledge. The crossing of dimensions was never casual. It was treated with the gravity of an initiation, demanding respect and discipline. McKenna too warned against approaching altered states carelessly. He believed that these states demanded intention. Otherwise, the traveller risked being lost in chaos rather than finding meaning. Seen in this light, the idea of hidden dimensions stops being a fringe notion. It becomes something almost universal in human culture. Civilizations that never met one another all arrived at the conviction that the world has layers, and that tools exist to move between them. McKenna's explorations, though modern in form, were ancient in spirit. He was participating in a story humanity has told since the beginning, that behind the familiar lies a more expansive reality, and that with the right preparation it can be touched. This shared inheritance leads to a deeper question. If traditions across the world all built methods to step beyond, what is it within us that makes such journeys possible? Are these techniques simply tools, or do they awaken something already present in the mind itself? McKenna leaned toward the latter, believing that the true vessel of dimensional travel is not the ritual or the substance, but consciousness itself. To follow that idea, we now turn inward to explore how the mind becomes the bridge between worlds. The mind as the vessel. The gateways carved by ancient traditions point to something deeper, the recognition that what allows these crossings is not the ritual itself, but the mind that enters into it. The chants, the texts, the rhythms are guides, but the real traveller is consciousness. Terrence McKenna understood this when he spoke of altered states. He saw the external tools not as the source of the journey, but as keys that awaken what is already present within. Psychology offers a language for this. Carl Jung explored the landscape of the psyche and spoke of archetypes, those timeless images and patterns that emerge in dreams and myths across cultures. To Jung, these were not personal inventions but expressions of a deeper structure of the mind, almost like doors that open onto a collective realm. McKenna's descriptions of higher dimensions often sounded similar, as if he too was stepping into that shared space where symbols live, a place both personal and universal at once. By entering these archetypal realms, a person does not just uncover private memories, but touches the same images that guided ancient myths and collective rituals. Mystical poetry also speaks to this capacity of the inner world. The Sufi mystic Rumi wrote of journeys that did not require movement through physical space but through the heart. He urged seekers to turn inward, saying that the real pilgrimage begins in the soul. His words carry the same message as the rituals of old. What matters most is not the outer form but the inner readiness. In this sense, the drumbeat, the prayer, or the sacred plant are mirrors that help the mind recognize its own ability to travel. Terrence McKenna often marveled at how easily the mind could reshape reality once it was pushed beyond its usual limits. He described experiences where time unraveled, where sound became visible, where language itself seemed to take on form and intelligence. These were not simply chemical tricks in his view, but demonstrations of the mind's hidden dimensions. Just as Jung saw dreams as windows into the collective unconscious, McKenna saw altered states as proof that consciousness was not a closed box, but a vessel capable of extraordinary voyages. These transformations reveal that perception itself is not fixed but elastic, capable of bending and unfolding into patterns that ordinary awareness cannot grasp. The image of the mind as a vessel is powerful. A vessel can float across water, carrying the traveller into unknown seas. But the sea in this case is the infinite field of perception, thought, and imagination. To step into it requires letting go of the shore of ordinary certainty. Rumi hinted at this when he spoke of dissolving into love or losing the self to find the beloved. Jung hinted at it when he warned that archetypes can overwhelm if not approached with respect. McKenna echoed both, describing the terror and wonder of being swept beyond the boundaries of what the ego can control. It becomes clear that preparation is not only cultural but psychological. A person must learn how to navigate the shifting terrain of their own mind. Without some sense of orientation, the experience can disorient or even shatter. Jung's work showed that myths and symbols provide maps, guiding figures that keep the traveller from being swallowed by chaos. Rumi's poetry offered another kind of map, one rooted in surrender and trust. McKenna, for his part, urged people to enter with both courage and humility, acknowledging that the vessel of the mind could reveal realities far stranger than expected. Without such guidance, the vessel of the mind can become a storm rather than a ship, leaving the traveller adrift in visions that overwhelm rather than illuminate. One of the striking patterns is how these voices converge. Psychology, mysticism, and McKenna's explorations all suggest that consciousness has depths we rarely touch. The outer tools are significant, but they are only catalysts. The true passage happens when the mind recognizes itself as more than thoughts and memories. In those moments, it becomes the vehicle, the landscape, and the traveller all at once. This recognition leads naturally to McKenna's experiments with what he called the plant teachers. If the mind already holds the potential for dimensional travel, then perhaps these allies from nature act as accelerators, amplifying what is latent within us. The next step in his journey is not a departure from the mind as vessel, but an expansion of it, guided by living intelligences that seem to speak through roots, leaves, and spores. plant teachers, and the living intelligence. The mind may be the vessel, but vessels often need winds to carry them forward. Terrence McKenna believed that certain plants and fungi served as those winds, not as mere substances, but as teachers with their own intelligence. He spoke of them as allies that revealed dimensions otherwise hidden, guiding those who approached with respect into a dialogue with the living cosmos. In the Amazon rainforest, shamans have long prepared a brew called ayahuasca, a dark and bitter tea that opens visions of other realms. The experience is not treated as a chemical reaction, but as a communion with a spirit. The songs sung during ceremonies are said to shape the visions, as though the plants themselves respond to music and intention. McKenna often pointed to these traditions as proof that humanity's relationship with entheogens was not reckless experimentation, but the continuation of an ancient partnership between humans and plants. Far across the ocean, in the valleys of Greece, another form of communion was practiced in secrecy for nearly 2,000 years. The Eleusinian mysteries drew initiates into a sacred rite where a kykeon drink was consumed, and participants spoke of encountering a vision that transformed their understanding of life and death. What exactly the drink contained is still debated, but its effects were described as a direct contact with the eternal. For McKenna, these mysteries stood as evidence that even the foundations of Western civilization rested on plant-induced doorways into higher dimensions. Placing these traditions side by side shows that cultures distant in time and geography still arrived at the same recognition, that plants can act as teachers. Their teachings did not come through lectures or doctrines, but through visions, voices, and symbols woven into the altered states they created. To McKenna, this suggested that intelligence in the universe was not confined to human minds. The plants themselves carried wisdom, and when consumed, they spoke in a language that reshaped consciousness. The nature of this language is not easy to describe. Many who drink ayahuasca speak of seeing patterns of light, of hearing the forest itself sing, of meeting beings that feel both alien and familiar. Participants in Eleusis described the terror and joy of being shown the cycle of life in a single vision. McKenna framed these reports as encounters with another order of reality, one that plants had guarded and revealed for millennia. To him, the message was clear: the natural world is alive and its intelligence extends beyond what human reason can measure. This idea stands in contrast to the modern habit of treating plants as resources or raw material. In the older view, a plant is not only physical but spiritual, a presence that can guide, heal, or challenge. The shaman who drinks ayahuasca does not imagine he is using the plant, but entering into a relationship with it. McKenna adopted this same language, often saying that psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca vines were speaking directly, teaching him in visions. He insisted that these encounters were not hallucinations, but communications with entities that carried knowledge beyond the individual mind. The transformative nature of these teachings can be unsettling. To be shown that the universe is alive, that plants themselves may think and teach, is to question the very structure of modern thought. McKenna argued that this was precisely the point. The entheogens dismantled the illusion of human separateness and revealed an ecology of mind, where consciousness flowed not just in people, but in the living world itself. He suggested that ignoring these voices meant ignoring a crucial dimension of reality. The courage required to meet such teachings cannot be overstated. Ancient initiates in Eleusis often described the vision as both terrifying and enlightening, as if death itself had been rehearsed. Shamans in the Amazon speak of battles with serpents, jaguars, and storms within the ayahuasca trance, trials that test the heart before revealing insight. McKenna acknowledged the same pattern in his own journeys, moments where beauty was inseparable from fear. These encounters, he believed, were not obstacles but lessons from the plant teachers themselves. What emerges from all of this is the recognition that the path through plants is not a detour from the mind's capacity, but an amplification of it. They push the vessel of consciousness into currents it might never reach on its own, carrying the traveller into landscapes where meaning is woven directly into vision and sound. The next question, then, is what happens once the threshold is crossed? What does reality look like when the teachings of these plants pull the curtain back and reveal dimensions that overturn everything we thought we knew? The shattering of ordinary reality. Crossing the threshold is not like stepping into a new room. It is more like watching the walls, floor, and ceiling dissolve at once, leaving only a vastness where familiar rules no longer apply. Terrence McKenna described this moment as both exhilarating and terrifying, a sudden dislocation that pulled perception out of its anchors. Those who experienced it often felt that logic and linear time had collapsed, replaced by a reality that seemed woven out of pure energy, symbols, and presence. In many accounts, the first sensation is one of overwhelming immediacy. Colours surge brighter than any earthly palette, sounds carry layers of meaning beyond language, and patterns unfold with a precision that feels designed. McKenna said it was as though the universe itself was speaking, not through words but through vision. This sudden influx can be so intense that the self, the I, that normally observes begins to fragment. What once felt solid turns transparent, and the idea of a separate identity starts to break apart. Psychological studies have a term for this: ego dissolution. Researchers investigating the effects of psychedelics note that participants often lose the sense of being a bounded individual. Instead, they describe merging with their surroundings or with a greater consciousness. This dissolution can feel liberating, like shedding an old skin, but it can also feel destabilizing, as if the very ground of existence has disappeared. McKenna often warned that without preparation, the shattering of self could leave a traveller lost in awe or fear, unsure how to return. Philosophical traditions anticipated this disorienting shift long before modern science studied it. In Hindu thought, the world of appearances is called Maya, an illusion that conceals the deeper reality of Brahman, the infinite. To realize that life is woven from Maya is to awaken to the idea that our everyday experiences are veils, convincing but incomplete. McKenna's descriptions of higher dimensional journeys echoed this idea closely. He suggested that what we call reality is only one layer, a construct our minds have agreed upon, and that beyond it lies a truth that breaks every boundary of logic. The destabilization of this discovery cannot be understated. When the sense of self dissolves, and when the solidity of the world is revealed as an illusion, fear can arise. Travelers report feeling as though they are dying, or that the fabric of everything they know is collapsing. For some, this feels catastrophic, but for others, it is liberation. McKenna insisted that both responses were valid, for to encounter a reality beyond ordinary limits is to confront both our deepest anxieties and our highest potential. At the same time, awe becomes unavoidable. The visions often carry a beauty so profound it is difficult to compare with anything in daily life. Geometries unfold that seem infinite in scope. Voices emerge that feel older than humanity itself, and the boundaries between thought and world blur. McKenna spoke of these experiences as if they were revelations, messages from another order of reality breaking into ours. They were not hallucinations in his view, but glimpses into the true architecture of the cosmos. Yet the beauty is inseparable from the destabilization. To see that reality can shift so radically is to question everything one once believed. How can ordinary life be taken at face value when one has seen time fold, space sing, and identity dissolve? The Hindu sages describe this paradox well. To awaken from Maya is both liberation and loss, a freedom that also strips away the comfort of the familiar. McKenna believed this double-edged quality was essential. Without it, the experience would not have the power to transform. Stories of this threshold often end in silence, because language struggles to capture what has no frame of reference. Participants try to describe patterns of impossible geometry, voices made of colour, or beings woven out of sound, but their words falter. McKenna himself laughed at the inadequacy of language in the face of these experiences, often turning to metaphor and poetry instead of analysis. He reminded his listeners that the shattering of ordinary reality is not meant to be neatly explained but directly felt. What remains after the collapse is the question of meaning. If the self can dissolve, and the world can melt into illusion, what is the purpose of such visions? Are they chaotic storms of the brain, or are they glimpses of a deeper order? For McKenna, the answer came in the next stage of the journey. The encounters that arise once the familiar has fallen away, when the mind, stripped of its illusions, begins to meet the intelligences that inhabit those hidden dimensions. Conversations with the other. When the walls of ordinary perception collapse, what arises is not only a flood of colours and patterns, but encounters with presence. Terrence McKenna often described these presences as beings, entities that seem to exist with intention, intelligence, and personality. They were not vague impressions, but vivid companions that spoke, gestured, and even taught. To him, these meetings were among the most astonishing aspects of dimensional travel, raising the question of whether consciousness is far more populated than we imagine. The forms these beings take vary, but their impact is consistent. McKenna spoke of machine elves who appeared playful yet wise, offering information through song and gesture. Others have reported angelic figures, ancestral spirits, or cosmic teachers whose presence radiated authority. The overwhelming impression is that the traveller is no longer alone but in dialogue with another order of intelligence. McKenna resisted reducing these beings to hallucinations, insisting that they carried knowledge that felt external to the self. Mystical traditions offer striking parallels. The Islamic scholar and mystic Ibn Arabi wrote of encounters with angels who guided him through visions of the unseen. These angels were not abstract symbols for him, but living realities, intermediaries between the human soul and the divine. His accounts resonate with McKenna's insistence that the beings encountered in altered states are not mere projections, but voices from another layer of reality. Both suggest that human consciousness is capable of perceiving realms populated with intelligence far beyond our own. Further south, among the Dogon people of Mali, cosmology speaks of beings who descended from the star Sirius to bring knowledge of creation. These spirit figures, called Nomo, were seen as teachers who shaped culture and order in the human world. The Dogon did not describe them as distant myth, but as active presences woven into their cosmology. McKenna might have recognized in these accounts the same archetype he met in his visions, entities that cross from the unseen into human awareness, carrying teachings that shift perception of reality. The question of who or what these beings are remains open. Some researchers argue they are aspects of the unconscious mind made visible, Jungian archetypes clothed in form. Others believe they are independent intelligences, glimpsed when the mind is freed from its usual limits. McKenna leaned toward the latter, though he acknowledged the mystery. What convinced him was not only their vividness, but the information they seemed to carry, ideas, images, and teachings he could not explain as products of his own imagination. Communication with these presences rarely takes the shape of ordinary speech. It is often reported as telepathic, symbolic, or even musical. McKenna described entities that sang objects into existence, creating tools and structures out of pure sound. Ibn Arabi spoke of angels whose messages came in visions that could only be interpreted later. The Dogon myths tell of beings who transmitted knowledge through ritual and symbol. In every case, the communication seems tailored to bypass ordinary language, reaching instead for a direct transmission of meaning. These encounters can be overwhelming. To meet a presence that feels wiser, older, and more powerful than oneself is both humbling and destabilizing. McKenna often described a mixture of delight and fear, as if the beings were simultaneously inviting and testing. He believed that the ability to engage with them required openness, curiosity, and a willingness to let go of rigid belief systems. Without that, the traveller might reject the encounter or collapse into confusion. The teachings received are rarely simple. They come as riddles, images, or feelings that unfold over time. McKenna emphasized that the true work often began after the encounter, when the traveller returned and tried to make sense of what had been shown. In this way, the beings served as catalysts, shaking the mind out of its normal structures and planting seeds of insight that grew in unexpected directions. Just as Ibn Arabi wrestled with the meaning of angelic visions, and the Dogon shaped their cosmology from the teachings of the Nomo, so too did McKenna wrestle with the messages of his otherworldly guides. The presence of these entities raises profound questions. Are we truly meeting others who dwell in hidden dimensions, or are we facing aspects of ourselves that take form under the right conditions? McKenna believed the distinction might not matter. What mattered was the undeniable reality of the encounter and the transformation it produced. The next challenge lay not in proving the being's existence, but in integrating their teachings into ordinary life, where visions must find a place within the fabric of daily reality. The challenge of integration. Visions from higher dimensions may feel boundless and luminous in the moment, yet the return to ordinary life is often sobering. The vivid encounters fade against the weight of daily routines, and the traveller is left with fragments of meaning that refuse to settle into simple explanations. McKenna knew this stage well, describing it as both the most necessary and the most difficult part of the journey. The challenge lies not in visiting other worlds, but in weaving their lessons into the fabric of this one. Confusion often follows the descent. What seemed perfectly clear in the altered state can unravel into paradox or contradiction once language is applied. Images collapse under the pressure of rational analysis, and teachings dissolve into mystery when placed under logical scrutiny. This dissonance can lead to frustration or even despair, as the ordinary mind tries to grasp what was never meant to be contained in words. The alchemists of medieval Europe spoke to this very tension with the phrase solve et coagula, to dissolve and to bind together. They believed that spiritual transformation required both the breaking apart of old forms and the careful reuniting of the pieces in a new order. McKenna's accounts echo this pattern. The journey shatters the ordinary sense of reality, and then, in the aftermath, begins the long work of piecing together a self that can carry fragments of higher truth without losing balance. Struggles with delusion are also common. In the glow of profound visions, one might be tempted to inflate the experience, declaring themselves chosen or enlightened. McKenna often warned against this trap, stressing that contact with the extraordinary does not automatically grant authority or wisdom. Without grounding, a person can drift into fantasies that isolate them from others, mistaking personal revelation for universal law. The weight of extraordinary encounters demands humility, not superiority. The Buddhist teaching of the middle path provides a compass here. It emphasizes balance, avoiding the extremes of denial on one hand and obsession on the other. Applied to the integration of visionary experiences, it means neither dismissing the encounter as illusion nor becoming consumed by it. Instead, the teaching encourages steady reflection, patience, and a willingness to allow meaning to unfold slowly. This middle way helps protect against both skepticism that reduces everything to brain chemistry and fanaticism that loses touch with reality. Daily practice becomes the ground where insights can take root. For some, this is meditation or journaling. For others, creative expression or ritual. McKenna often reminded listeners that the dimension-breaking journeys were only half the work. The other half was lived in ordinary time through art, conversation, and the quiet effort to live differently. In this sense, integration is less about translating visions into fixed truths and more about allowing them to transform how one moves through the world. The difficulty lies in the slowness of the process. A single evening in altered consciousness may take years to fully understand. Images reappear in dreams, phrases resurface in unexpected moments, and decisions are shaped by insights long forgotten by the conscious mind. Integration asks for patience with mystery, for trust that meaning reveals itself in layers rather than all at once. McKenna often compared it to tending a garden. What is planted in the vision must be watered by time, reflection, and daily life. Not every teaching from the other side is comfortable. Some encounters expose hidden fears, unresolved grief, or aspects of the self long buried. Integration requires facing these shadows without turning away. The work is as much about healing as it is about illumination. The dissolving of old patterns can bring pain, but the process of coagulating into something new allows deeper resilience and compassion to grow. At its heart, the challenge of integration is about carrying the fire without being burned. To honor the visions while remaining grounded, to live in the ordinary world while holding memory of the extraordinary is a delicate art. McKenna saw this balancing act not as a burden, but as a responsibility, a way of ensuring that the wisdom of higher dimensions could flow back into the human story, enriching culture, creativity, and understanding. The question then becomes how such personal transformations ripple outward, shaping not only individual lives but the collective future of humanity. Humanity's evolutionary threshold. Every personal encounter with the mystery of higher dimensions carries within it the seed of something larger than the self. McKenna often suggested that these journeys were not only private revelations, but glimpses into a collective possibility, as though humanity itself was standing at the edge of a great threshold. The challenges of integration reveal that the individual's task is inseparable from the destiny of the whole, for the wisdom carried back from these realms can ripple outward, shaping the future of our species. Visions of this future have long appeared in spiritual traditions. The Hopi people speak of cycles in which humanity passes through different worlds. each time facing trials that determine whether we are ready to enter the next stage. In their prophecy, a time comes when the old world begins to collapse, and those who are attuned will help guide the crossing into a new one. This vision echoes McKenna's belief that the encounter with higher dimensions is not a fringe pursuit, but part of humanity's unfolding story, a preparation for transformation on a planetary scale. Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit mystic and paleontologist, framed a similar vision in his idea of the Omega Point. He saw evolution not as a random process, but as a journey drawing all consciousness toward a higher unity. According to him, the countless individual struggles, insights, and awakenings of humanity converge in a future state of collective realization. McKenna's explorations align with this trajectory, suggesting that the doors opened by altered states may be early glimpses of that unified field of awareness where inner and outer dimensions merge. The growing interest in practices once confined to mystics, shamans, or visionaries suggests that humanity is already moving in this direction. Meditation, plant medicines, and contemplative arts are spreading across cultures, offering ways for more people to taste the wider spectrum of consciousness. What was once secret or hidden is now surfacing, as if the human species itself is being invited to expand its sense of reality. McKenna's method becomes not just a personal experiment, but part of a shared movement toward a new kind of mind. The role of these explorations may be less about escape and more about preparation. By touching dimensions beyond the ordinary, individuals stretch the boundaries of what it means to be human. They bring back insights into interconnectedness, creativity, and the fragility of the earth that can inform how societies evolve. The visions of the Hopi and the ideas of de Chardin both suggest that humanity's future depends on the capacity to see beyond immediate survival and into the deeper currents that connect us with one another and with the cosmos itself. But thresholds are never without risk. Just as integration at the personal level requires balance, so too does humanity's collective crossing. The dangers of delusion, fanaticism, or technological misuse are magnified on a global scale. McKenna often warned that without wisdom, the tools that open dimensional doors could also destabilize societies. The evolutionary threshold asks not only for vision but for responsibility, for the courage to hold both the light of possibility and the shadow of our limitations. Art, myth, and story play an essential role in this process. They allow truths that cannot be spoken directly to be carried into the collective imagination. The beings, visions, and revelations of higher dimensions find their way into paintings, music, and language, subtly reshaping culture from within. This creative flowering may be one of the clearest signs that humanity is already stepping into its next stage, weaving fragments of other worlds into the fabric of daily life. At the heart of this vision lies an invitation. The threshold is not reached by a few, but by the many, each carrying their own fragment of the greater whole. McKenna's explorations remind us that the higher dimensions are not distant heavens, but living realities waiting to be recognized, both within and beyond us. Teilhard de Chardin's Omega Point and the Hopi prophecy of a new world point in the same direction, toward a future where humanity awakens to its greater potential. The question that remains is how each of us will answer that call, and what worlds may unfold as we step forward together. Thank you for watching. If this journey sparked something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries of consciousness.